Have you ever been on the most wanted list? I sure hope not. But you never know. So let's see what's on the US FBI's most wanted list by Trust Me Bro. I back to the Japanese version. So let's see what's on this one. Hope
The
you
most
enjoy.
notorious fugitives ever on the FBI's most
Mhm.
wanted list. About a month ago, I made a video about the FBI's most wanted list, and in that video I said if you guys wanted a separate video about the most wanted criminals ever, I'd make it. And well, here we are.
Oh,
Today,
I
we're
thought this was
discussing the
the
most
original.
notorious
Okay.
criminals to ever be on the FBI's most wanted list.
Mhm.
And as a fair warning, this video gets crazy, and you're definitely gonna recognize some names on this list. Let's get right into it.
Don't give
Thomas
me
James
that
Holden.
credit.
I knew I had to put James at the very beginning of this list, well, because it was symbolic. Thomas
Hmm.
James Holden was the first criminal ever to be on the FBI's most wanted list,
Hmm.
and is very likely one of the reasons why this list was even invented in the first place. Thomas was a career criminal and started his life of crime long before the FBI's most wanted list was even established. In
Mhm.
1926, James Holden and his partner Francis Keating led the Holden-Keating gang. This gang specifically specialized in committing robberies, and they weren't your
Ooh.
old-timey purse snatcher. They were robbing banks,
Mhm.
hijacking trucks full of money, and even held up trains, among other
Mhm.
things. Although
Typical
this
stuff.
gang's reign of terror didn't last long, as 2 years later, in 1928, Holden and his partner were sentenced to 25 years in prison.
Whoa.
Although after only serving 2 years, he escaped from prison and immediately started a new gang, where
Mhm.
once again his career continued, and he was robbing trains, buses, and banks up until 1931 when he was captured again. After his capture in 1931, Holden served time in Alcatraz and was later
Ooh.
paroled in 1947. But of course, that's not where the story ends.
Mhm.
In 1949, 2 years after being released from prison, Holden murdered not only his wife, but also 2 of her relatives during a domestic dispute. After committing these murders, he fled the state, and it was this horrific crime that earned him a spot on the first ever FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list, which was officially released a year later in 1950. Holden was caught only a year later in Oregon, working a normal job and using a fake name. And after his trial, he was convicted of murder later that year. Holden died only a few years later while in prison. James was undoubtedly a horrible person, but I find this story interesting because his life of crime started long before the FBI's most wanted list. And it was partly his actions along with the actions of other career criminals that inspired the FBI to make a most wanted list, to get support from the public. And immediately after this first list was published, its usefulness became instantly obvious, as it took less than a year for the FBI to find Holden after murdering his wife and 2 other men. So yeah, Holden was the first man ever on the FBI's most wanted list, and for that reason, I knew I had to put him on this list, and I figured why not put him first. Quick note that this video is in no specific order. I'm not ranking these people. None of these criminals are better or worse than each other. I'm not going to incentivize that. These people don't deserve that. All of these people are horrible and have done horrible things. But yeah, let's keep going. Eric Rudolph. Eric Rudolph is a domestic terrorist better known as the Olympic Park bomber, and he was responsible for numerous bombings and murders from 1996 to 1998, most notably including the bombing of Centennial Olympic Park during the 1996 Summer Olympic Games in Atlanta, Georgia. This bombing killed 2 people and injured over 100 others, and this was also the first of many bombings he committed. The other bombings he eventually confessed to make his motives rather clear, as he targeted and bombed 2 separate abortion clinics within Georgia, followed by bombing a lesbian bar, and then that bombing was followed by his final bombing,
Really
which was of
pro-life
another
of
abortion
him.
clinic in Birmingham, Alabama. This final bombing killed a police officer and injured a nurse, among other people. Rudolph used homemade bombs that he filled with nails to maximize the damage, and he wanted to hurt people and send a message. Rudolph claimed to be against global socialism and abortion on demand, and he believed that the government was supporting both of these things. During the 1996 Olympic Games, he saw these games as a promotion of global socialism, and he thought that the government supporting this was completely unacceptable. And because he was already upset that the US government was supporting abortion rights, he decided to go and hurt and kill innocent people. What a lunatic. In 2005, Rudolph pled guilty to multiple homicide charges and actually received 4 consecutive life sentences as a part of a plea bargain. Yeah, that was his plea deal, 4 consecutive life sentences. However, this plea bargain did allow him to avoid the death sentence, which, I mean, I'll let you form your opinion on how you feel about that. Regardless, he is
Shoulda
currently
gotten it.
incarcerated at the ADX Florence Supermax prison in Colorado, and is also one of the most notorious criminals ever on the FBI's most wanted list. Ted Bundy. Bundy is a name that I would bet money you've heard before,
Yep.
and I've even talked about him numerous times on this channel, so I'm gonna keep this segment a bit brief. But I did want to toss out Ted Bundy early in this list because I figured some of you guys would be looking for names you'd recognize, so here's one. And don't worry, there's more later in the list you'll definitely recognize. Back to Ted. Ted is undoubtedly one of the most notorious serial killers of all time, and also one of the most notorious people to ever be on the FBI's most wanted list. Bundy is responsible for the abduction, sexual assault, and murder of at least 30 young women and girls during the 1970s. And his crimes happened all across the United States of America. Bundy's typical methods of luring his victim would be by pretending to be injured or disabled, or by pretending to be an authority figure, such as a police officer. And typically what he would do once he has people's attention and trust is he would lure these young women to his car under the guise of requiring some help putting something in the trunk, typically. At that point, he would bludgeon these women unconscious and then put them in his vehicle, and then what he did from that point is just diabolical. And it's very likely you already know what he was up to. Not only would he sexually assault and kill these women, but he would also sexually assault their dead bodies and even mutilate them, keeping parts of these bodies as trophies. And that's really only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to his depravity. Bundy was actually caught and escaped from prison twice. And on his third time in prison, he was eventually given the death penalty, where he was executed in 1989, ending his reign of terror. And if you're curious about exactly how Ted Bundy got caught, check out this video on screen after this video. I'll link it in the description for you. It's a video where I describe how the most infamous serial killers got caught. So yeah, Ted Bundy is not only one of the most notorious people ever on the FBI's most wanted list, he's also one of the most notorious serial killers and criminals of all time. And if you are familiar with his story, it's rather unfortunate how he was able to get away with his horrific acts for so long. But that's a story for a different video, and I have videos on my channel where I go into detail about that. Check out the serial killer series on this channel if you're interested. Let's keep moving. Victor Manuel Hardena. Victor is a notorious entry on the FBI's most wanted list for a few reasons. Firstly, because he was on the list for the longest time ever. Like, more than anybody. Like, nobody spent more time than him on the list. So I'm assuming he was pretty good at hide and seek as a kid. But seriously, jokes aside, he spent over 32 years on the list as a most wanted fugitive and was not captured ever. The only reason that he was removed from the list on December 15th, 2016 is more or less because he no longer met the requirements, which really means they decided that other criminals were more worth pursuing and having on the list. Victor was officially added to the list on May 14th, 1984, and the reason that he was added to this list was for a crime that also makes him a notable entry on the FBI's most wanted list as a whole, because he is associated with one of the largest cash robberies in U.S. history. On September 12th, 1983, while working for Wells Fargo, Victor plotted and conducted a theft of over $7 million cash from a Wells Fargo armored car facility in Connecticut, which is just an absolutely insane feat, and adjusted for inflation, it only gets crazier. In today's money, he stole the equivalent of roughly $19 million cash. After this robbery, it is believed that he was smuggled to Mexico, and it is believed that he is now somewhere in Cuba. So yeah, Victor is on this list for a few reasons. The insane heist he pulled off, the fact that he was able to not only escape the police, but also the country, and the fact that he was able to not be caught for over 32 years while being a most wanted criminal.
I mean, that doesn't seem
insane.
that
It's a bit of a nice
bad
palate
compared
cleanse
to,
be able
you
to
know,
discuss a bank
Ted
robbery
Bundy
instead of some of the
or
other
the,
things we've discussed
you
and
know,
we'll continue to discuss, because
Olympics
unsurprisingly,
thing.
the most wanted of the most wanted are a depraved bunch. And with that, let's get to our next entry. Ramzi Yusuf. I would assume everybody watching this video is familiar with the terrorist attack that took place on September 11th. However, that wasn't the only attack that took place in the World Trade Center. In 1993, a terrorist attack masterminded by Ramzi Yusuf took place in the World Trade Center, and it claimed the life of 6 innocent people and injured over 1,000 others. Hours after the attack, Ramzi fled the country, and for that reason, he was put on the FBI's most wanted list. While on the run and on the most wanted list, he also essentially co-founded the Pachinko plot, which was an elaborate scheme to carry out multiple large-scale attacks and create essentially global terror. The Pachinko plot, simply put, was a plan to kill the Pope as a distraction, and then while people were distracted by the murder of the Pope, 11 planes on the way to the USA would be hijacked and bombed, which is an absolutely insane thing to consider, that this was a serious plan that people were putting money, energy, and effort towards. Fortunately, this plan failed, and in 1995, Ramzi was arrested in Pakistan while he was attempting to put a bomb in a toy doll. At this point, after his capture, he was extradited back to the United States. Ramzi, along with 2 of his co-conspirators, were convicted for their roles in the 1993 bombing and the Pachinko plot. And Ramzi specifically received 2 life sentences plus 240 years for his involvement in these acts of terror. The story ends there, but I do have a few interesting facts. One of Yusuf's uncles is actually credited as one of the principal architects behind the September 11th attacks. And Yusuf is currently behind bars at the same prison that Eric Rudolph is at, the ADX Florence in Colorado. Also, interestingly, this is the same facility where Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, was also held. But I guess it makes sense. These are all extremely dangerous people. Rafael Caro Quintero. During the time that Rafael was on the FBI's most wanted list, he was actually the record holder for the highest reward offered by the FBI for information. That reward being $20 million, which now is a bit more common and that record has been broken, but at the time, the FBI was not messing around and they wanted this guy. For good reason too, as Rafael is one of the most notorious Mexican drug lords of all time and is the co-founder of the Guadalajara cartel, one of the earliest and most powerful drug trafficking organizations in Mexico. Rafael was a kingpin in the drug trade during its boom in the 1980s, known mostly for his brutal tactics and massive influence and power. Rafael is most infamous for his involvement in the 1985 kidnapping and murder of a DEA agent. And this specific murder severely strained the relationship between the US and Mexico. Fortunately, Rafael was caught and was sentenced to 40 years in prison, but unfortunately, he was actually released early in 2013 due to a legal technicality. That being that a lawyer argued that his trial should have been at the state level and not the federal level. And I suppose that was enough to have him released from jail, which is insane. When news broke that this drug lord who killed an American official was released from jail, all hell broke loose. And only days after his release, the Mexican and American governments put him back on the most wanted list. However, it did take them 9 years to catch him again. And from 2013 to 2022, he was a free man until he was once again captured by Mexican authorities in 2022 and was extradited back to the United States to stand trial, specifically for drug trafficking charges. Rafael's full story and list of crimes goes far beyond the scope of this video, but trust me when I say, not only did his story at the time make headlines, but he is also definitely one of the most dangerous and notorious entries ever on the FBI's most wanted list.
Really?
Semyon Mogilovich. Mogilovich is another criminal we've actually talked about on the channel before. And if you've seen that video, then you would know that Mogilovich is known as the boss of bosses, or the most powerful and dangerous gangster in the world. A pretty crazy title, but his crime resume definitely backs it up. Keep in mind, that's not a name he gave himself. That name was given to him by the FBI. Semyon is alleged to have built a vast criminal empire with involvement in every illicit activity you can think of, including extortion, money laundering, drug trafficking, human trafficking, weapons trafficking, murder for hire, fraud, and much more. One of his most notable accusations is his multi-million-dollar stock scheme he actually performed in Canada, where him and a group of associates were able to scam over $150 million out of investors by essentially having a fake company listed on the TSX, the Toronto Stock Exchange. Mogilovich is considered to be the most dangerous and most powerful criminal because his power comes from the sheer power of his network. Not only is he himself an educated and well-connected and rich person, but he is also connected to every rich crime boss globally, making his influence extremely dangerous and extremely powerful, which is why in 2009 they put him on their list. However, in 2015, he was actually removed from the list as there is no extradition treaty between the US and Russia, meaning that Russia has no incentive to send this criminal to the States. And for that reason, the FBI thought it made sense to put somebody else on the list that they had a better chance of getting. Although that doesn't mean that he's any less wanted or any less dangerous. Although, as of now, he is still a free man. James Earl Ray. The infamy and story of this individual is likely the most interesting and twisted by far. James Earl Ray was a small-time criminal who was arrested and eventually escaped from jail. And a year after escaping from jail, he allegedly assassinated Martin Luther King later, on April 4th,
That's
1968,
why
in
I know
Memphis,
the
Tennessee.
name.
Following this assassination, Ray fled the United States, got a Canadian passport, and then traveled to London, where he was recognized and caught. And the following year, he pled guilty to the crime and was sentenced to 99 years. Now, that is a very simple story, but that's where the lines begin to get blurred. Because although assassinating one of the most famous civil rights leaders of all time is definitely going to earn you a spot on this list, that's not quite what everybody believes. In 1977, Ray actually escaped from prison again, and this second escape from prison would put him back on the FBI's most wanted list. I kind of forgot to mention, but the first time he was put on the FBI's most wanted list was after his alleged assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. Regardless, after escaping from jail for a second time, he was caught after a 54-hour manhunt. Now, interestingly, after being re-caught and re-put in prison, Ray began to renounce his guilt, essentially saying the confession he gave before wasn't true and I actually didn't do it. Now, this raised a lot of questions because at the time, and even to this day, people theorized that the death of Martin Luther King Jr. wasn't by some small-time criminal, but potentially by the government. Unfortunately, Ray never had any evidence to present that he wasn't guilty and that the government was. Most interestingly is that MLK Jr.'s family believe that Ray is not the killer, and they supported his motion to have a retrial and are very vocal about the fact that they believe that it was a government conspiracy. However, no matter how you feel about it, the judge, the government, the FBI ultimately decided that this was definitely Earl James Ray. The case at that point was closed. Was James Earl Ray framed, or was he the assassin? I don't have an opinion on this yet, but I'm curious to know what you guys think. So yeah, James Earl Ray is one of the most notorious people on the list for allegedly assassinating one of the most famous figures in political history, and also for the conspiracy surrounding his alleged involvement. Crazy stuff, but we still got two more to cover. William Bradford Bishop Jr. Bishop had a seemingly perfect life. He graduated from Yale, worked as a U.S. Foreign Service officer, married his high school sweetheart, and had 3 sons with the love of his life. Now, obviously, you don't end up on this list for having a picture-perfect life. As the story goes, Bishop was denied a promotion at his job, and for that reason, he left work, withdrew a large amount of cash from the bank, purchased a ball-peen hammer, a gas can, and other supplies, went home, and then allegedly murdered his entire family, including his wife, his own mother, and his 3 sons. He then transported their bodies to North Carolina, where he buried them in a shallow grave and set them on fire, and then left the scene. Bishop's car was later found abandoned in Tennessee's Great Smoky Mountains National Park near the Appalachian Trail, where his car full of personal items linked him directly to the murders. However, despite multiple sightings in the US and even in Europe, Bishop has been able to evade capture ever since these murders took place. It is suggested he has done so because he is fluent in 5 languages, is an experienced outdoorsman, and his skills and background with his job made him particularly elusive. Although these murders of his entire family took place in the 70s, it wasn't until 2014 when he was added onto the list. And only 4 years later, in 2018, he was then removed from the list because the FBI stated that they wanted to focus on more recent cases. But that doesn't mean that they aren't still searching for him, but they're just not prioritizing this one to get the most wanted list exposure.
I'd say he's
To this
probably
day,
dead.
Bishop could still be alive, and at this point would be 89 years old. And it is rather
Yeah, no
unfortunate how
American
he
is
was
living
never
that
able to be
long.
brought to justice. And I find it a bit odd that he was added to the most wanted list so far after he committed such heinous activities and essentially got away with it. But regardless of timeliness, he was an entry on the FBI's most wanted list, and a very notorious one at that. Now, let's get into the final entry on this list. Osama bin Laden. While this video isn't in any particular ranking, I figured it made sense to put Osama last, as he is likely by far the most recognizable person on this entire list. Osama definitely didn't need the help of the FBI's most wanted list to gain notoriety, although it did help bring awareness about this terrifying individual. Osama bin Laden is the founder of Al-Qaeda, a militant organization responsible for numerous terrorist attacks, most famously including the September 11th attacks that killed nearly 3,000 people. And while that attack is how most people are aware of Osama bin Laden, his criminal history and even his time spent on the FBI's most wanted list far predate the September 11th attacks. Osama was actually on the FBI's most wanted list as early as 1993, mostly because of his involvement in Al-Qaeda and the numerous terror attacks that they were committing, one of which being the Mogadishu bombing, in which Somali rebels trained by bin Laden and his partners killed 18 American servicemen. That same year, Osama was also tied to the first attack on the World Trade Center, the one that we discussed previously that was primarily masterminded by Yusuf. His ties to that attack and the Mogadishu bombing were more than enough to land him a spot on the most wanted list. But that's obviously not where the story ends. 2 years later, in 1995, he attempted to have the Egyptian president murdered. And in 1996, he bombed a US Air Force complex in Saudi Arabia. And then in 1998, over 200 people died as a result of bombings in the US embassies in both Kenya and Tanzania, both of which Al-Qaeda took credit for, which means that they were directly linked to bin Laden himself. And of course, most famously, on September 11th, 2001, bin Laden was tied to an attack that not only made him one of the most wanted people by the FBI, but one of the most wanted and most known criminals in the entire world. And following that attack, the FBI put a $25 million reward on any information that would lead to the capture of Osama. From 2001 until 2011, Osama was able to live freely, although in hiding, until May 1st of 2011, when SEAL Team 6 stormed his compound and ended his reign of terror for good. Osama bin Laden was on this list for nearly 2 decades, and is likely responsible for more deaths than anybody else on this list, and is not only one of the most notorious people to ever be on the FBI's most wanted list, but one of the most notorious criminals and terrorists of all time. A truly evil individual. And ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. A list of 10 of the most notorious fugitives to ever be put on the FBI's most wanted list. From 1950 to 2025, these are 10 people that the FBI definitely won't be forgetting anytime soon. Fortunately, most of these criminals were brought to justice, and for the few that haven't, hopefully justice is served sooner rather than later. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. And if you guys liked this video about the FBI's most wanted ever, check out this video on screen about the DEA's most wanted. This is a video about...
My camera has been acting up a lot in this video, so sorry about that. But yeah, I was correct in the assumption that I had in the last video about this, that the US had a lot more insane ones than Japan had. I did not know most of these. Did you know them? Let me know below. And until next time, bye bye.